Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the YWCA Racial Justice Breakfast. We're looking forward to a great presentation from our keynote speaker, Christina Fialho, co-founder and executive director of Freedom for Immigrants. But before we get to that, we have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's events. First, today's webinar will be recorded and emailed to everyone who has registered. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation, so if you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the Q&A function on your screen. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. Finally, we'd like to encourage you to share today's events with your social networks. You can join the conversation on Twitter at YWCA Cincinnati. Use hashtag #StandUp4RJ. This stands for Stand Up for Racial Justice. The YWCA's mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Fighting for racial justice is not only a core part of the YWCA's work, it is also a deeply held value, one that we have been true to for 152 years. Our work today is aimed at addressing systems of oppression through advocacy, community and panel discussions, workshops and trainings, restorative justice practices in schools, and strong collaboration with our community partners. But the tragedies we've seen this year have made it very clear that there is still so much work to do. This morning, we'll take a deeper look at the U.S. immigration system, especially immigration detention. This is yet another system built on the criminalization and dehumanization of Black and brown bodies. But before you hear from our excellent speaker, Christina Fialho, I'd like to introduce you to the chair of the YWCA's Board of Directors, Diane Jordan. Diane has been many things, and whatever the role she chooses, she's always focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're lucky to have her considerable talents for the many YWCA projects. Diane?
Thank you, Angie. We'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors. We are truly grateful for your support of our mission to eliminate racism. Our champion sponsors are Interact for Health, Natasha Kavanagh and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Our defender sponsors are Christ Church Cathedral and PNC Bank. Our advocate sponsors are Bank of America, Vincent and Valencia Brown, D.E. Fox and Associates, the E.W. Scripps Company, Federal Home Loan Bank of Cincinnati, Game Day Communications, the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, Hard Rock Casino Cincinnati, Risk Source Clark Theaters, Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. And thank you to all of our supporter sponsors out there. We're so glad that you've joined us in support of this work. The work of the YWCA would not be possible without the support of those who believe in our mission, just like you. We have an easy way for you to support our racial justice work right from the convenience of your mobile phone text. We invite you to make a gift today. Just open a new text message to the number 44321. Then type equal. After you hit send, you will get a text message in response with a link that you can connect and click to fulfill the pledge by entering your credit card information. It's that easy. Our goal is to reach $3,000 through text donations this morning. That amount will help us continue our racial justice work, and it will take all of us to make a significant change. Since 2007, we have recognized members of our community that have proven themselves true leaders in the fight for racial justice. We're proud to present the YWCA Racial Justice Awards to two racial justice warriors. Dr. Odell Owens, President and CEO of Interact for Health, will help us recognize these very two special people for their amazing work over decades.
The thing about Janet is not just her business acumen, that's well known, we know that. But Janet's the person that answers the call. Not everybody can. A lot of people want to answer the call, but not a lot of people can't do the call. In 2001, when this city was being torn by what then they called a race riot, Janet was one of the people that stepped up, not to step up to the call, but she was the one that was the voice to help conceive the Can Commission and follow through on the Can Commission. That's what I remember. But Janet has done so many things like that. People don't realize that she's an author as well. That not only is Janet and Vincent sharing their work today, but they're categorizing their work so that people of tomorrow will understand the lessons of today and yesterday. So maybe they don't make the same mistake. In Janet's early life, people used to say, people say, oh, Janet's a great role model for young Black girls. And she was. She lived up to that. Later on, I heard people say, oh, Janet's a great role model for all women. Yes, she has stepped up and she is that. But let me tell you, Janet's a role model for men as well. Certainly for me. I've always admired Janet and admired the work. And it's nothing in the past 35 years that's changed that. She is consistent. She does the work. She's impactful. But she always wants to remain in the shadow, never taking credit and giving that to others. So Janet, my friend, I love you. This is such a special day for me to be able to share these thoughts to you. I don't see that often, but here's my opportunity to thank you for your friendship to the city of Cincinnati, your friendship for the world, your expertise, and being my friend as well. So I present Dr. Janet Reid for the YWCA Racial Justice Award.
Wow. Dr. Owens, thank you so very much for your very, very kind words. And all I can say is back at you because you too are out in the community doing everything possible around racial justice, and especially the injustice that comes when you look at healthcare disparities and all of your leadership. So I thank you so much for your very kind words. And I'm honored and humbled to receive this award. I give also my deepest thanks to Diane Jordan, the YW board chair, and to Barbara Perez, the president and CEO, and also to the selection committee who saw fit to bestow such an award upon myself and my longtime business colleague, Vincent Brown. Personally, if I had such a prestigious award as the Racial Justice Award that I could bestow personally, I'd bestow it right back on the YW, right back on you. And this is because I know from the inside the YW's dedication to eliminating racism and empowering women and promoting peace and justice and freedom and dignity for all. And it's not new with the YW. It's not that the YW has just been woke, to use the popular terminology of today. The YW's been at this since the early 40s. And in the early 50s, when pillars of our community like Marion Spencer and others were fighting just for integration, the YW's cafeteria was a place where Black people and white people could come and sit down and have a bite to eat in peace. And it continues with the YW. And in about 96, the YW established a racial justice committee. And you still continue to do things in your stand against racism to build community among those who work for racial justice and to raise awareness about the negative impact of institutional and structural racism in our communities. Dr. Owens said it clearly. I've tried to work all my life to bring people together with greater understanding of each other and having more grace and more love for each other. I've been blessed to do that in a company that started off as Global Lead and then became Global Innovations, and today is BRBS World LLC. But I was raised this way by my parents and my grandparents who did the same hard work, and my husband who does the same hard work, and my whole family. So I thank the YW on behalf of my very, very diverse and very inclusive family for working to make a future that is brighter than it is now, for the sake of my grandchildren who represent all races and GBLTQ and just about everything that one can think of when you think of diversity. It's in my family. And I encourage all of us to unite with the YW, especially now when we are so divided in our country and divided around the world. Dr. Owens mentioned this. Yes, we have worked all around the world, and some of the same divisions we see here are happening everywhere. So I encourage all of us to unite with the YW to do what is difficult, the difficult things. That is to seek first to understand that which you may not agree, to lean toward peace and away from demonizing people and hatred, and away from thinking things are so simple as they are all bad and we are all good, or they are wrong and we are right. Life is more nuanced than that. I encourage all of us to unite with the YW and walk in someone else's shoes and be empathetic, and to focus as the YW has done for many, many, many years, on the dismantling of racism and on the empowerment of women. So again, I say to the YW, thank you so much. I'm humbled and I'm grateful for this award.
Vincent, as we stated earlier, was part of developing Global Lead and Global Innovations with Janet. And as I said, he is so lucky because when he sits down and plays with his grandchildren as he begins to age, he can say, I not only answered the call with Janet, but I also was able to have impact around the world. But Vincent also, Vincent, I learned from you very early on. Everybody else was talking about diversity. You were talking about inclusion. And that always wasn't together. It was all, initially everybody just talked about diversity. And you brought in the word inclusion. Yes, not only must we be recognized, but we need to be at the table and be equals. The thing about Vincent that I love the most, Vincent, you have that ability to walk into a room with a group of people who you're going to make them uncomfortable. Because when we start dealing about racial justice and racism, which is the hardest conversation in America, it is an uncomfortable conversation. But you have that ability because of your great smile and your great personality, which just radiates over the room to provide a sense of safety. People feel safe. And when people feel safe, then the conversation becomes authentic. Then the conversation becomes where you can begin to work from it. Then the conversation becomes where people can begin to truly look at themselves, because Vincent, you're never judged. You never judge. And the one thing I love about you, Vincent, is through the years, as you began to work, you stayed in Cincinnati, you stayed with your home city, and we needed that. We needed heroes and role models like you here in Cincinnati. Even though you were the globetrotter and went around the world, I appreciate the footprint that you left here in Cincinnati and continue to do in Cincinnati. I marvel at the fact that many people, Vincent, who have climbed the mountaintop that you have for justice, to bring equity to people, that you could say, okay, I've done what I've done, and can sit down. But no, you didn't. You picked it right back up and you're still doing it. And I'm sure you'll do it until you can't do it anymore. But there are a lot of people, Vincent, that you will never meet, that you'll never know about, whose lives you touch, because you talked about equity and racial justice and being fair and getting people to try to love each other, even though they may come from different backgrounds, different racial, different genders. But you have taught people to open their hearts up while they open their brain. So brother, I can't think of anybody better other than Janet that I would do this for and be part of saying to you that I'm proud that you're getting the YWCA Racial Justice Award. You deserved it, you've earned it, and I want you to cherish it.
Thank you. And the word that comes to my mind for you, Dr. Owens, is brother. And I want to thank you for that introduction. I want to thank you for our friendship over the many, many years. I want to thank you for being the leader that you are, and quite honestly, being a role model to me. So I want to just thank you so very much. My heart is full as I think about this award, and I want to thank everyone for bestowing this upon Janet and myself. So I want to send a shout out to the YWCA for honoring Janet and me, and most importantly, for the work that you do each and every day for women and for justice. And when I think about the fact that you've put together both of those two words, that's why this really means so very much to me. Anytime you receive any kind of recognition, I believe it's not recognition that happens with one individual, but there are many different people who have impacted your life along the way. And I want to just share my story and my acceptance in the context of those who have really shaped who I am and how I do what I do. And I first want to give honor to the Almighty. Janet and I and Sam would always talk about 4 guiding principles that we believe in. The first is God is great. The second is relationships rule. The third is you get more when you give more. And the last and certainly not least is life is truly a circle. What you give out, you get back. And I will say that whatever we've done, we've gotten so much more from it. So we are really appreciative of that. Also, in all types of faith traditions, I want to thank my father for being in the military and being my first male role model. Because of him being in the military, I traveled all around the globe. And I believe that's where my seed for diversity and inclusion really got planted, because I was always around different people from different backgrounds, different races, different religions. I was at a mosque, I was at a synagogue. I was sitting at a Samoan pig roast. I had this opportunity to make connections with all kinds of people. And I believe it was that root that really was planted early on that allowed me to do the work that I was so fortunate to do, am so fortunate to do. And Odell, you're right, we'll do it every day for as long as I can. I also thought a lot about the women that shaped my life. This is about the YWCA women. That first woman is Arthenia Elizabeth Brown, my mom, who when my dad was overseas was really nurturing me and my brother and talking about who we were and what we needed to be. And I think about her every day. I think about my wife for 39 years who has, nurtured me and worked with me and supported me and has helped raise my 3 sons. Valencia. I think about the fact that I have been mentored, coached, and shaped by one of the most brilliant women on the planet, Janet. So in our day-to-day conversations in life, she has been my best friend, mentor, coach, and arch nemesis, right, JB? I mean, we go at it because we're not business partners, we're brothers and sisters. And so we've been on this journey together, and we're actually really pretty relaxed now compared to what we used to be in our younger days. But I actually love her, and she has forced me to be the best I could potentially be. And then last and certainly not least, I'm being nurtured now by LaToya Everett, who is my Chief Administrative Officer, who Janet and I hired as an intern, who is now our CAFO. And she is now really taking the next level for learning. So I have been so fortunate and blessed to have women shape my life each and every day. I also think about the reason why I continue, and I'm so blessed to have 2 grandsons here, 1 on the way, and I'm waiting for that granddaughter. I'm absolutely waiting. But my sons, my daughter in love, Deanna, I'm just so fortunate. But then none of this happens unless the people that we've worked with, that we've partnered with, all the folks that were part of Global League, Global Novations, BRBS World, Lynch Brown and Associates, we've had some amazing people, all races, colors, sexual orientation, who have been part of our team, who have championed us and helped us grow over these 30 plus years. And I want to thank each and every one of them, because they really are the ones carrying this award. And then the last thing I'll share is that the work continues, that the work that Janet and I are talking about most today is this whole idea about implicit unconscious bias. But the good news is that there are some of us who are intrinsically inclusive, and that's the great news. And the things I think we need to do are based on the research that we've been talking about most recently. It is creating connected understanding, creating shared trust, having respectful empathy, and most importantly, creating relationships with people unlike ourselves. When we do those 4 things, we can continue to make a difference. I am forever humble. I want to thank the committee. I want to thank Barbara. I want to thank Diane. Dr. Owens, when I knew that you would make this announcement today, that's the only thing that could have made it better. Thank you all so much. God bless you.
Vince and Janet, thank you for all you've done and continue to do to promote equity in our workplaces and in our hearts. You're truly an inspiration. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Christina Fialho, co-founder, executive director of Freedom for Immigrants. Christina is an attorney, a human rights activist, an immigration expert who has spent nearly 15 years advocating for immigrants. Prior to starting Freedom for Immigrants, Christina assisted in defending immigrants from detention and deportation, with a focus on representing LGBTQ asylum seekers. She's argued cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and the U.S. Immigration Courts. She co-founded the first visitation program in California while still in law school. She's recognized as a national expert on immigration detention and has won multiple awards for her groundbreaking work, including the 2020 John F. Kennedy New Frontier Award, and we are thrilled that she's here with us this morning. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I think so. Well, I am so honored to be here with all of you today. My name is Christina Fialho. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Freedom for Immigrants, which is a national nonprofit working to abolish the U.S. immigration detention system. I also am an attorney based in California, and it's about 5 a.m. in the morning. So there are very few reasons I'd wake up this early in the morning, but I'm such a fan of the YWCA. My nonprofit, Freedom for Immigrants, is a women-led nonprofit, and I've really looked to organizations such as the YWCA as leaders in this space. You know, they have been leading the way not just for women's rights, but also on all major social movements in the last 150 years. So I'm so excited to be with you all this morning, to celebrate their achievements, and to share with you about the U.S. immigration detention system. Specifically this morning, I'll be discussing hate and bias in the immigration detention system. Not a light subject for breakfast time, but it's important, especially in Ohio, where there are 4 immigration detention facilities. In fact, right outside of Cincinnati, in Hamilton, there's the Butler County Correctional Complex. And at the Monroe County Correctional Facility, which also is an immigration detention facility in Ohio, there have been nearly 50 confirmed COVID-19 cases. But before I get into too much detail, let me begin with a story. I met Sylvester while he was in an immigrant jail. He had escaped Kenya after being imprisoned and beaten in his home country for his political activism. But rather than protecting him, the US government detained him. Not for a few days, not for a month. Sylvester was caged for 9 years and 4 months. In immigration detention, he was unable to contact his family, unable to speak with his mother before she passed away, and he witnessed other men being brutally beaten, this time by our government. As the daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of immigrants, I wouldn't even be here if the United States hadn't welcomed my family in a time of crisis. But not all families are treated equally. While the Trump administration's immigration policies represent a startling escalation over prior administrations, immigration detention is not new. Right now, there are tens of thousands of immigrants detained in county jails and for-profit prisons. Immigration detention itself is rife with abuse, such as medical neglect that has led to death and sexual assault by guards perpetrated with our tax dollars. In fact, Freedom for Immigrants conducted the first national study on abuse motivated by hate and bias under the Obama administration. We were witnessing a rise in abuse motivated by hate and bias in U.S. immigration detention under the Trump administration. For example, we were receiving reports from people in detention who were saying that officers were abusing them physically while screaming racial slurs. For instance, an officer at a Texas detention facility told a man, quote, "Shut your racial slur ass up. You don't deserve nothing. You belong at the back of the cage." Another officer at a Massachusetts facility said, quote, "No one will believe baboon complaints." People are called monkeys, terrorists, animals. Transgender women are referred to as he, she's. And it's clear the government isn't doing anything about it. Freedom for Immigrants filed a Freedom for Information Act request with the Department of Homeland Security for instances of and responses to complaints or grievances related to hate crimes from 2010 through July 2017, so under the Obama administration. We received a response with a total of only 86 reported complaints in this nearly 7-year period, really indicating that DHS is clearly not properly categorizing or tracking abuse motivated by hate and bias. But people in immigration detention aren't just suffering verbal abuse. We also have documented widespread physical abuse, and the government is failing to track or respond to this abuse too. For example, under the Obama administration, we found that the Department of Homeland Security's Office of the Inspector General received over 33,000 complaints of sexual assault or physical abuse against DHS component agencies. But the Inspector General investigated less than 1% of these cases. More complaints were submitted against ICE than any other DHS component agency. ICE is the agency that oversees immigration detention. Of the total number of complaints, over 44%, or nearly 15,000 complaints, were lodged against ICE, followed by CBP, also known as Customs and Border Protection, which also detains people at the border. This is extremely disturbing because immigrants who have survived abuse in detention are re-victimized by an ineffective and frankly non-existent investigation process. By not properly investigating each allegation, our government sends a message that sexual abuse and physical assault of immigrants will be tolerated. We know that abuse continues because there is no independent oversight. It's basically ICE overseeing itself. This is why Freedom for Immigrants' work is so important. I will speak about this in more detail later in the presentation, but Freedom for Immigrants has convened a national network of what we call visitation programs. We build and support community-led groups to visit people in immigration detention weekly, offering them a connection to the outside world, but also building power with them to be the eyes and ears of the system, monitoring it for human and civil rights abuses. For example, take the story of Carlos. He was detained twice, once at a county jail contracting with ICE, and another time at the largest private immigrant prison in the country, the Adelanto Detention Facility. While there, we worked with him to expose a host of issues. In addition, he helped to lead the largest hunger strike in known immigration detention history, with about 400 people going on hunger strike. The hunger strike led to 3 articles in the LA Times in less than 1 week and it caught the attention of state legislators who worked with Freedom for Immigrants on a bill I'll speak about later. Right now, I'd like to share more about what it's really like in immigration detention from Carlos's perspective with a short video. I'm going to turn it back to YWCA to play the first video of Carlos.
Taking on their dignity and their pride is one thing, but taking on your dreams, what's after that? My name is Carlos Hidalgo. I'm 46-year-old. And I've been detained in Adelanto Detention Center for 8 months. To tell you the truth, I've been in California since 1981, and I never heard of Adelanto until I was brought to Adelanto. The process starts by being in a holding tank. There's no life to it. It just echoes, you know. And you're there with another 10, 15 people that just have the deadest look on their eyes. And when you look at them, you see yourself. You see how helpless you feel, how impotent you are to the system, but you don't know what's going to happen next. So they put you 5-6 hours, and by the time it's time for you to go in and take you to a dorm, usually it's like around probably 8 to 1 o'clock in the morning when they bring you in. From the psychology, you start, deteriorating. And you don't want to fall asleep, but you're so tired you fall asleep, and as you wake up, it's like, who's left, who's gone? And you see a couple of beds being made up already, rolled up, because someone was deported at night, you didn't even know. Most of us sleep through it, and it's like, next thing you know, you wake up and your bunkie could be gone. Or the next door guy, could be gone. When it came to grievances, I would put hands on everything that was going on. So we'll go directly to the officers, and I would confront them with every issue that was happening as far as, like we're missing blankets, or it's too cold, the heater, the food, anything. I would just write grievances on everything. But I was trying to make sure to get anyone's attention to get the matter handled. We had infestation of flies during the summer. Oh my God. You took in not hundreds, thousands of flies swarming all over the dorm. And they said to me, we need proof. Look around you. Well, they're just flies, they'll go away. They wouldn't get those fly tapes, right? So what I did, and a couple other guys helped me, and they started sorting flies. I collected over 200 flies in a paper bag, and I handed it over to the lieutenant and say, Lieutenant, is this proof enough? And she was like, what the hell are you doing? And I'll go, well, you wanted proof? She just got grossed out, and she didn't want to believe me. So I'll come back, and I'll get you some answers. Say, okay, I'll be back. And she never came back. I guess she was afraid of flies. When I left, I looked back and I see this line of people lining up to, come up and talk to me. I didn't realize how much I had impacted people being there, helping them out. It's sad to look back and see grown men looking at you, and the only person that can help you now, and people telling you, oh, there goes our helper, and there goes our leader. And I didn't feel myself being a leader, but I felt someone that could make an impact. But those that don't know what I know and don't speak like I do, who's going to speak for them? Who's going to bring them to the light? And I just focus on helping one person at a time right now. And no matter how they are and what they live and what they've done, doesn't mean they have to be singled out on a group of people that doesn't hurt to be here. This is the United States of America. This is the place where everybody dreams about making a life. I ain't going to give up on that.
So a little background on that video. That video was produced by Freedom for Immigrants. Our former name was Civic. We actually had to change our name because Corrections Corporation of America, the largest and oldest private prison company in the United States and in the world, changed their name to Core Civic, which was confusingly similar to our name. So we had to change our name, which is great because our new name really stands for what we believe in, and what we're fighting for, which is freedom for immigrants. And this video always gets me. I'm always amazed by the human resilience, because even in the face of such horror, Carlos helped us all to laugh. I'm always taken by the way he explains about swatting the flies, and he's an amazing organizer and really a comedian as well. So through work with people like Carlos and Sylvester, and in partnership with our affiliated visitation programs, we file federal civil rights complaints to hold the government accountable. And the very first civil rights complaint that we filed was on behalf of 20 men, including Sylvester, who I mentioned earlier. We filed it against the Etowah County Detention Facility in Alabama on behalf of men who were being handcuffed by ICE officers, taken to a basement, beaten on a mattress until they went unconscious, and their fingerprints were being used to sign their deportation papers. They were then being deported along with these stories of abuse. We intervened and stopped this practice. It should be clear by now that the system is a failed experiment and that our country can do better. But you might be wondering, how did the system get started to begin with? Well, the first Immigration Act in the United States passed in 1790, and it was, as you can all imagine, explicitly racist. It allowed US citizenship to be granted only to, quote, free white persons of, quote, good moral character. Although citizenship was regulated at that time, migration itself was not as closely monitored until the late 1800s. And of course, that's when immigration detention really began in this country. Over the next 60 years, civil immigration detention began to expand on Ellis Island, which was the very first immigration detention facility in the world, and on Angel Island on the West Coast, as well as in jails, ships, and other places of confinement across the United States. Since its inception, immigration detention was designed. It was really designed to jail vulnerable populations. It jailed and continues to jail Black, brown, and Asian bodies, as well as LGBTQ immigrants. But between 1790 and 1980, so we're up to the present almost, so between 1790 and 1980, there were only about 30 to 3,000 people being held in immigration detention on any given day. I just want to say this again because it's worth repeating. Prior to the 1980s, there were only about 30 to 3,000 people held in immigration detention on any given day. Under the Trump administration, there's been as many as 50,000 people detained per day. So what changed? Well, in 1983 and 1984, two private prison companies formed, and they began lobbying for laws to expand not only immigration detention, but our mass incarceration system as a whole. For example, they heavily lobbied for two laws passed in 1996 under President Clinton. These two laws doubled immigration detention almost overnight, from 8,500 people in 1996 to over 16,000 people in 1998. Since then, immigration detention has been a bipartisan issue in the sense that every administration has increased immigration detention. Now, 70% of detained immigrants are caged in private prisons, which profit from their abuse. These two laws that I'm speaking about are the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRA. And they did a number of things, but I'd like to just hone in on three of these things. First, it took discretion away from judges to grant release to certain people. So about half of the people in immigration detention will languish in immigration detention until their case is finalized, which really can take years, as we saw with Sylvester. It took 9 years. Sylvester was not being held actually for the commission of a crime, because immigration detention is actually a civil form of confinement. It's administrative. It's not supposed to be punishment, but people are being held, for weeks, months, years. And I don't think there's anything civil about 9 years in immigration detention. Second, it required that asylum seekers be immediately detained at the border. So if you're fleeing persecution in your home country and you come to the United States to seek protection at a port of entry, like a border checkpoint or an airport, it's a requirement that you be immediately put into immigration detention. Third, it strips certain legal permanent residents. Yes, I'm talking about green card holders, including US veterans, of their status. So if you've fought for our country, but you may not have had the support you need to integrate back into society after your service, and you commit even a minor crime or are found in possession of drugs, you can be detained and deported. For example, take the case of Marcella. She was seeking asylum and came to the United States on a visitor visa. At the airport, when she arrived, she told the officers that she was afraid to return to her home country, and she was seeking protection from our government. She was immediately put into a holding cell and then transferred to the James Music Jail, which is a county jail in California that contracted with ICE. I'd like to play a second video so that Marcella can share in her own words what it was like in immigration detention. So I'll turn this back over to the YWCA.
Well, it's a place that makes you break your heart all the time. So we try to distract ourselves and try to draw like the faces of the women there. My name is Marcela Castro. I have been detained at James A. Music Facility over 6 months. Most of the time you are really listening a lot of people who are telling you sad stories, and you are really try to not think on those things every day. I remember one time when it was October 31st, and we have a lot of Kool-Aids for drinking, which not everybody drinks because they are not really good flavor, but it has colors, so we try to mix it with a little bit of water, and we try to make makeup. We could use the color pencils as the line your eyes. So we were playing and pretending to have makeup, and everybody gets involved, and we got too much fun that we didn't care what's going to be the risk of it. But the deputies, they got a fun day. Next day, they told us we wouldn't be able to have makeup in the detention at all. If the officer catch you with the items, they will put you in the hole. Every time that you have like something else or something different that you could do to distract your mind, the officers, they always come and take your options to be free. They don't let you to do anything different. They don't let you to be a human being or to think. They don't let you to be yourself.
Well, like Marcela said, she spent over 6 months in immigration detention. And we actually worked with a lot of women like Marcela at the James Music Facility where she was detained, who were discriminated against for their gender. In fact, we documented women being thrown into solitary confinement while they were menstruating. The women would ask for period pads, but the jail staff would only give 1 or 2 or none. And this was a pattern or practice that we documented at the jail, where women were taken to an outside hospital and without their consent, forced to undergo hysterectomies or other surgeries without their knowledge. Years later, things have not changed much. In fact, just this week, a whistleblower nurse at an immigration detention facility in Georgia came forward to sound the alarm that women are being subjected to horrific conditions and treatment, including, quote, jarring medical neglect and a high rate of hysterectomies among women. The nurse, Dawn Wooten, has been practicing for more than 10 years, 3 of which she was employed at a detention facility called the Irwin County Detention Facility, which is a privately run detention facility in Georgia. She said an off-site doctor supposedly performed the surgeries on the women who complained of heavy menstrual cycles, but that many women seemed to not understand what had happened. And actually, in many cases, nurses obtained consent from the women by simply Googling Spanish. They didn't even speak Spanish in communicating with these women. She said, quote, everybody this doctor sees has a hysterectomy, just about everyone. That's his specialty. He's the uterus collector. Everybody's uterus cannot be that bad, end quote. This isn't the first time the United States has forced people, especially people of color, into unwanted sterilization, which is a human rights violation and a form of eugenics, according to the World Health Organization. For more than 70 years, California, where I'm based, actually led the country in sterilizations. During that time, about 20,000 people were sterilized against their will in state institutions. In the South, Black women were treated as, quote, practice for incoming medical students and were sterilized unknowingly during C-sections. Other times, they were coerced in order to retain welfare benefits. Sterilization was so widespread in North Carolina that a bill was passed recently in 2015 to give victims financial compensation. I hope by now it's clear that our immigration detention system is abusive. What is even more troubling is that our tax dollars are being used to perpetrate this abuse. It doesn't have to be this way. We really can and we must build a country where no person is in prison for crossing a border. And here's how. Freedom for Immigrants is working to abolish the system through a two-pronged approach. First, we have built a network of 4,500 volunteers that is a consistent watchdog inside this system. We started by building the first visitation program in California. Now, volunteers visit people in 69 immigrant prisons in 30 states, including in Ohio, on a weekly basis. They offer a lifeline to the outside world and they expose abuse. Second, we launched a community-based decarceration program to free over 250 people so far, like Sylvester, by paying their immigration bonds, which is like the criminal bail process, but for immigration. Once released, we connect them to housing, lawyers, transportation, and mental health services. We are proving that our decarceration program works, and it's time for the federal government to get on board. Freedom for Immigrants drafted and passed the first statewide bill in the country to stop the expansion of detention and give the state attorney general oversight powers. This bill was passed in California and is called the Dignity Not Detention Act. Since Dignity Not Detention went into effect, 7 municipal jails were forced to end their contracts with ICE, including the James Music Facility where Marcella had been detained. We then worked in a statewide coalition of immigrant rights and criminal justice groups to pass another bill to actually phase out private prisons in both the criminal and civil contexts in California. Together, we're proving that abolition is possible in the 5th largest economy in the world. Now, other states are following our lead, and we were able to introduce federal legislation. Our legislation was introduced last year by Senator Kamala Harris and Representative Pramila Jayapal. And it would actually cut the immigration detention population in half and use the money currently slated for detention to fund community-based decarceration programming, like what I mentioned earlier. While we continue to push this type of federal legislation, the fight in states like California isn't over. Private prison companies are trying to circumvent the law. In fact, right now, the largest immigration detention facility in the country, the Adelanto Detention Facility, where Carlos was detained, is trying to expand by another 750 jail beds. Freedom for Immigrants is trying to stop the expansion, and we're doing that through policy advocacy, litigation, and by raising awareness about what is happening behind closed doors. And we've been fortunate to work with a number of award-winning artists to do this. For example, last year, we consulted on Orange is the New Black. If you watch this Netflix series, you will know that the last season actually takes place in an immigration detention facility. One of the storylines follows Diane Guerrero's character and how she was released from criminal custody and then detained in an immigrant prison. Inside this immigration detention facility, she had no access to the outside world. She didn't even have money to call an attorney or her family. But then her character learns about the Freedom for Immigrants national hotline that she can call for free. This is an actual hotline that we run. We receive up to 10,000 phone calls per month from people in immigration detention across the country who are in need of our support. Many of them, like Diane's character, haven't been able to contact their loved ones because the phone calls are just too exorbitantly priced to actually make a phone call. So with our hotline, people are actually able to call us at no cost to them. But sadly, in retaliation for our work on Orange is the New Black, ICE actually shut down our hotline. Now, we've sued the government and we've been granted a preliminary injunction. While the hotline has been turned on, this just goes to show that ICE will stop at nothing to prevent the truth from getting out. So it's up to each of us to share what we know about the system and to get involved. I want to encourage you to support your local community, to support the YWCA. If you're interested in visiting an immigration detention facility, please be in touch with me. Our member visitation program in Ohio visits at the Morrow County Jail and the Butler County Jail. And we're always looking to partner with pro bono attorneys and with community members who are interested in getting involved, either as visitor volunteers themselves or actually starting a program at some of the detention facilities where we don't yet have a visitation program. And you can learn more about this work on our website at freedomforimmigrants.org.
Christina. We'll now take some questions for Christina, and Danielle Fiersick, who manages the YWCA's Immigrant Survivors of Partner Violence program, will facilitate our Q&A. Danielle?
We'll enter our Q&A portion of the programming now. Just as a reminder, if you haven't already, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. And it looks like we already have a few questions, so let's get started. Living in Ohio, sometimes the crisis at the border can feel very far away. What are ways to increase empathy among our neighbors, maybe even in our families, who don't feel like this issue impacts them personally or locally?
Immigration detention isn't just a border issue. Immigrant rights isn't just a border issue. These are people who are living in our communities who are literally being ripped away from their families, ripped away from their communities, and they're being put into immigration detention facilities. And most of these facilities, the 200 plus that I'm talking about, aren't at the border. They're in the interior. They're in Ohio. So this is literally something that's happening in our backyards with our tax dollars. So when I first started doing this work, my goal was to kind of remove the conversation from the purely political conversation of how do we change policy and really talk about the relationships. So when you bring somebody from the community in to visit somebody in immigration detention, the issue becomes not an issue anymore. This is a human being who is caged behind bars with your tax dollars. And as you form a relationship with that individual and you build power with them, that's where real change lies. So I'd encourage folks to just become familiar with the system. We have a lot of resources on our website for that, and I'm always happy to talk to folks as well.
Another one here. Despite massive underreporting in detention centers, we know that approximately 20% of detainees have tested positive for COVID. What measures, if any, are being taken to address this crisis?
Yes, so sadly, our government, not unsurprisingly, has done a terrible job responding to this pandemic, both outside of immigration detention, but definitely within immigration detention as well. Like the person who asked the question said, yeah, there's about 18 to 20% rate of infection in immigration detention right now in terms of who's being tested. And we know that ICE is actually not even testing properly. So there's probably a lot more people in immigration detention right now who are suffering, who are at risk of dying. There's been about 6 deaths, I believe now, in immigration detention due to COVID-19. We've documented horrific responses to immigration detention. So there's really no way to social distance in immigration detention. And the government has made matters worse. In a number of detention facilities, they have been spraying a toxic chemical on people. And it's been so bad that the company that produces the toxic chemical had to release a statement saying that they don't condone spraying this toxic chemical on people. We filed a complaint on this, and we're trying to get the government to stop this horrific practice. It makes literally no sense. But our organization, along with a number of other organizations, because of course this work, you can't do it alone, you gotta work in coalition, have been really calling to free them all. So to release people from immigration detention rather than pretend that there's a way to social distance in immigration detention. And we know this is possible because actually in Spain, they have decarcerated immigration detention completely during the pandemic. So now they have no one in immigration detention. So if Spain can do it, the United States can as well.
We have a lot of fantastic questions here. There are a couple that are addressing the same issue around congressional response to these issues. So I know that your organization has said that less than 1% of sexual and physical abuse complaints are being investigated. Has there been any result concerning your filing of the federal civil rights complaint?
Sadly, no. So most of the complaints that we do specific to a particular detention facility, because we've actually been able to achieve change when it's directed at a specific jail. This complaint was a national complaint, really to raise awareness that this is a widespread issue. So we've gotten definitely legislators involved who have tried to put forth legislation to put more money towards the Office of Inspector General to actually investigate these complaints, for example. But nothing's really changed, which is awful. And actually, in response to our complaints, instead of addressing the issue directly, ICE, of course, adopted a head in the sand approach, pretending that nothing was wrong. And then they petitioned the National Archives so that they can actually get rid of, completely erase all of their information on sexual assault and physical abuse over the last 30 years in immigration detention. We've luckily stopped that from happening.
I have a question from Diana. Are there instances where volunteers arrive at jail or detention centers to speak with the detainee and are told by officers that they need specific paperwork in an attempt to block the visit?
I love all these specific questions. Yes. So since we got started in 2009, but it was very volunteer based for a few years. So since 2013, we've actually had over a dozen of our visitation programs shut down temporarily because volunteers have spoken out against the system. We've gotten all of the programs restored because it's been a clear violation of our First Amendment rights. But yes, the government, these private prison companies, the county jails that are contracting with ICE are always trying to prevent people from coming in. So they do a lot of shady things, but that's the power of this national network, is that we can hold each other together and we can hold the government accountable. So we will fight to get everyone in that wants to visit, especially family members who also are routinely prevented from seeing their loved ones.
I have another question from Liz, combined with another attendee's question. Other than raising awareness, can we do anything tangible to respond to the recent ICE whistleblower allegations? How can we hold ICE accountable? And why haven't there been any human rights charges brought against ICE or the current administration?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's another wonderful organization in Georgia called Georgia Detention Watch. So I'd encourage you to look into them. They help to bring forth this whistleblower complaint. So definitely check out their website. I would also say that one of the main reasons that there aren't many lawsuits being brought really anywhere is that there's really no private right of action in immigration detention for people who are trying to uphold their own human and civil rights. So in California, we actually tried to pass legislation that would give people in immigration detention a private right of action to sue. So that there'd be an easier process for which they could sue, because it's really difficult to bring a class action lawsuit. You need resources, you need attorneys. So there have been some class action lawsuits that have been brought over the years about human and civil rights abuses, but not to really any real extent. So if there are any lawyers in the room that are interested in getting involved, love to partner with them and brainstorm how we can do that.
Can you speak to the average amount of time someone is held in detention before deportation?
Yes. So basically, the government says that the average amount of time in immigration detention is anywhere between 23 to 30 days. But we know that this is false. close to half of the people that we work with have been in immigration detention for over 2 years. And there's actually no time limit. So because immigration detention is a civil form of confinement, there is actually no criminal sentence. And so people can languish in immigration detention for, like I said, months, sometimes years, like Sylvester, 9 years. I think the longest somebody spent in, again, this civil form of confinement was 17 years.
I have a question from Susan. How high are the reported instances of sexual abuse in detention centers, and do you believe this reporting to be accurate?
Yes. So the data that we got from the Office of the Inspector General was just data given to us from the Office of the Inspector General. We actually also FOIA'd ICE itself. We FOIA'd another department within DHS called the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Neither of them got back to us. So there's a whole host of other complaints that have been lodged that we don't even have access to. But we've received dozens, if not hundreds of, at this point, complaints just within the last year from people who have experienced sexual and physical assault in immigration detention. And it takes a lot for an individual to actually file a complaint on sexual assault because they know they're going to be retaliated. We've documented people being transferred, being deported, definitely being thrown into solitary confinement for trying to bring justice, achieve justice for themselves when they're assaulted. And when a person in immigration detention is assaulted by the prison staff themselves, who are they going to go to? They don't feel safe. So the fact that these people are even speaking out shows that this is just a small portion of what's actually happening in immigration detention.
I have a question from Diana. How profitable is it for these detention centers to partner with ICE in their work?
Yeah, so these private prison companies, it's a racket. This is a cash cow for the private prisons, but also for the county jails. We can't forget that the county jails are getting a per diem per person when they contract with ICE. So a lot of the times when we try to put pressure on counties, for example, to end their contracts with ICE, to actually be responsible to their constituents, especially if their constituents are engaged and are calling for the jail to end, they point to that this is not possible because of their budget, that this contract with ICE allows them to continue to do their other work. So we know that even though these contracts are supposed to provide money to the private prison company or the jail to actually provide services, in quotes, to people in immigration detention, they're siphoning this money off to other programs that they may have or to their own salaries. So it costs about $165 per person per day to keep somebody in detention. That's just tax dollars. Our alternatives to detention, our decarceration programming, costs about $17 per person per day compared to $165. So again, this is an unnecessary practice. And I'll just say one more thing. So in addition to the contracts between the private prison companies and ICE, or the county jails and ICE, these prisons are actually also contracting with other companies and getting commission payments from them. So the reason why a prison phone call is so exorbitant is because they're getting a huge percentage of actually each minute that the person tries to contact a loved one. It's going right into the coffers of the jail itself.
I think we all know that we have a very important election approaching. So how can we encourage people to use their right to vote to address this issue? And how can we counter arguments like those discussing open borders?
Yeah, so definitely vote. That's the number one thing you can do is vote. Vote your conscience and educate your community members about what you've heard today, about what you know, and help them to get out and vote. That's hugely important. In terms of open borders, our ultimate goal as an organization is to build a country and a world where no person is imprisoned for crossing a border. I think you can create a system where people are allowed to migrate. Humans have been moving. We've been on the move for centuries. Since the beginning of time, we've been an animal that moves. And so to restrict that has been really the problem. So I think, it's not really a question of getting rid of a border. The question is really, how do we respond to migration humanely? And it's very clear that there is no reason why we should be imprisoning somebody like Marcella, somebody like Carlos, somebody like Sylvester in an immigration detention facility when it's actually less costly and obviously humane and more humane, not that prison is humane in any way, so definitely humane, to provide people with the support that they need so that they can continue to go through their immigration case. And I'll also just say that, we don't even have to necessarily change any immigration laws. I think there are many that need to be changed, but we don't actually have to change any particular immigration laws to abolish immigration detention today.
The current administration has also proposed regulations that advocates and lawyers fear will impact gender-based asylum claims. Can you tell us more about this and how it will affect LGBTQ+ asylum seekers in particular?
Yeah, could you just ask the question one more time? I want to make sure I got it right.
So the proposed regulations that the current administration has revealed are thought to severely impact gender-based asylum claims. So can you tell us more about gender-based asylum claims and how they affect the LGBTQ+ population of asylum seekers?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this has been an area of the law that has been litigated for a long time. We've seen a lot of changes just within the last decade. For asylum law, so asylum is basically a similar process to the refugee process. So instead of getting refugee status in, for example, a UNHCR camp abroad, a person can get the same status by claiming asylum in the United States. And the ways in which an individual can achieve getting asylum is by obtaining it under what's the title? The social, it's been a long time since I practiced asylum law, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to actually answer this question, but I'll just suffice it to say that within immigration law and within the immigration detention system, as I spoke about earlier, gender-based discrimination is still alive and well, and LGBTQ immigrants are disproportionately affected by this system of incarceration. There's actually a detention facility in New Mexico that is supposedly housing transgender immigrants, and that facility is widely been documented as a facility that has so much abuse, and that's because the guards are really not trained properly for caring for particularly vulnerable populations.
I have another question that says, so impressed with what your organization does. How do we get the word out and share your work to a broader audience, social media, etc.?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So in addition to our website, Freedom for Immigrants, you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Our handle on Instagram and Twitter is @migrantfreedom. And on Facebook, it's just /Freedom for Immigrants. So definitely encourage you to look at that. We also have this amazing timeline on our website and a map. It's a real-time map of immigration detention that you can actually look at a detention facility in Ohio or anywhere in the country and understand how much the jail is getting per person per day, how many people on average are detained at that facility, and the types of abuses that we're documenting at those facilities. So definitely encourage you to tweet out anything about those two things. And for the map, it's just freedomforimmigrants.org/map.
All right, I am going to take our final question. You stated that there are 4 immigration detention facilities in Ohio. how can we as community members and advocates work for greater justice for local detainees besides the program you already mentioned where you can visit those detention centers yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So in addition to the visitation program, if you're interested in getting involved from your home, we have our national hotline where we actually route phone calls to cell phones or landlines for our volunteers, and they answer calls in 2-hour shifts. In addition, people in immigration detention really need financial support, both to pay for additional food, because people in immigration detention are not being provided with enough food. So money to buy stuff in the commissary. Also, really the only way to get people out of immigration detention for a vast majority of them is to bond them out of immigration detention. Otherwise, they'll languish there until they're deported or they win their case, which can take years. So we also have a national bond fund. So if you're financially inclined to donate directly to the bond fund, 100% of those donations go directly to paying for that person's freedom.
Christina, and thank you, Danielle, for facilitating that session. And thank you to each of you in our audience for taking part in this critical conversation. We hope you'll take what you learned today and share it with others. And we thank you again for your contributions. We're almost to our goal, but we haven't reached it yet, so please keep those gifts coming in. The text to give number is still operational after the event, so we're looking forward to receiving that number continue to rise. All you need to do is open a new text message and text the number 44321, type equal, hit send, and then follow the link in the reply text message and follow those instructions. For those of you seeking CLE credit this morning, please check the link in the survey displayed in the chat box. The survey will also be emailed tomorrow so that you can gather feedback about the event. But in order to be eligible for the CLE credit, your survey will need to be completed today. We truly value your feedback. We'd like to remind everyone of our virtual panel discussion on voting. It's happening next week on September 24th. Our esteemed panel of local experts will talk about how to vote safely in this year's election, how to engage voters, and what you can expect on the ballot. You can register for this free event on our website, YWCACincinnati.org. Ensuring everyone is equipped and able to vote is so important. The YWCA is proud to partner with the Greater Cincinnati Voter Collaborative. It's a nonpartisan collaborative of local organizations working to amplify safe voter engagement and advocacy efforts. You can find a one-stop shop full of comprehensive voter resources and opportunities to join in the effort to get out the vote on their website, safetovoteathome.org. As we bring our Racial Justice Breakfast to a close, we want to thank you once again for joining us. Hopefully, we'll be able to see each other next year in person. We'll see you then.